Welcome, and thank you for attending this week's live Thursdays at noon special election community event. We will be recording this and posting it on our websites for after the fact viewing. But first, and most importantly, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples in the Williams and Huron-Robinson Treaties area. We recognize the long history of First Nations and Métis people on this land and show respect to them today. We acknowledge our neighbors, the Watam Mohawks and the First Nations of Moose Deer Point, Shawanaga, Wasauksing, Magnetawan, Henvey Inlet, Nipissing, and Okies. We're back during this provincial election to give the candidate seeking your vote in Parry Sound-Muskoka the opportunity to speak directly on the issues. Today, we have new Democratic Party candidate Erin Horvath. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
People know you from your work in Huntsville and from the last campaign, but would you like to introduce yourself to the folks who may not be as familiar with you?
Absolutely. I would love to introduce myself. So first question that everybody always asks me is if I am related to Andrea Horvath. So the answer is no, I am not. If you look closely at our last names, we have a slightly different spelling. In terms of who I am, though, I wear a few different hats, like many folks here in Parry Sound-Muskoka and Almeguin. So one of the hats that I wear, perhaps my most favorite one, is I'm a mom of 2 teenage boys who live with me here in Huntsville. A few other hats I wear. I'm the executive director and co-founder of New Vision Unlimited, which is a not-for-profit community development organization that I started in 2006. And we've had a chance to work in many different places across the province in a whole range of initiatives, including First Nations, environment, mental health, addictions, healthcare, economic development, the whole gamut. One of my enterprises kind of falls under that umbrella, and it's called the Hub Muskoka, which might be what you're referring to, Pamela, as far as how people might know me. So the Hub Muskoka is an award-winning co-working center here in Huntsville, and we have about 125 different small businesses that work under in our space. A few other hats. I am the social and environmental justice lead for a national charity, and I work on climate issues, water preservation, and First Nations issues. I also bring with me a wealth of experience in climate policy and environmental negotiations. I've been a land use planner for 2 First Nations communities for several years, and was also a part of the Forest Stewardship Council, which is, if you take a look at the backside of paper and it says FSC certified, that was a whole process that took many years to be implemented, and I was a part of that. So these are some of the skills that I bring to this election and into this world, and I hope to offer to our riding as something that will dramatically improve our ability to work together to create change. So not just being a voice in Queen's Park, but also having the skills to work at the grassroots.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Let's get right into the questions. How would your party and you advance the actions proposed by the Truth and Reconciliation Report and the actions in the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirited Peoples Report?
So this is probably a question that has, the closest to my heart. I have 2 Indigenous sisters, and I've worked in Indigenous communities for over 25 years. So one of the reasons that I can represent the NDP is that it's the only party that has made a bold statement to say we will interact with First Nations on a nation-to-nation basis. So part of what this means then is we will look at issues such as water, education, housing, all of these sort of things. And if it's in Ontario, we will address it. And then we will build a federal government. So this prevents the passing the Bill of Responsibility, which is essential if you're ever to make any progress when it comes to any of the issues. So specifically then, with that approach, we would implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Saul Memekwa has already been working to get that accomplished. We would establish a Treaty Commission of Ontario to help settle land claims. We'd establish a provincial strategy to address suicide among First Nations youth. Again, something very close to my heart. Many young people I know personally have taken their lives. Addressing racism within the healthcare, education sectors, all of these sort of areas. We know it's pervasive. We know it needs to be intentionally dealt with. We would be supporting Indigenous communities to identify sites of bodies from residential schools, introduce a mandatory curriculum. So Conservative government has asked that. We would implement that. And a key point here is that it's not just created by anyone, it's created by Indigenous peoples with a decolonizing mentality in mind. And we would implement the National Inquiry into Missing and Murders in Indigenous Women and Girls, those recommendations. So lots there, but the key point is that it would be not passing the buck of responsibility between the federal or provincial. It's to deal with it locally and then build the federal government.
Thank you, Erin. That was a fulsome and well-informed answer, and I really appreciate that. How will you advocate for healthcare in Parry Sound-Muskoka?
This is another really important one. So first thing people always ask is, will the NDP support 2 hospital sites? Yes, we will. Absolutely. And it's justified by the increase in population. That's important, but not the most important thing right now going on. If you talk to our healthcare workers, I just spoke to my doctor personally the other day, and they're all burnt out. They are as close to nervous breakdowns as they've ever been, with hundreds of positions unstaffed. At the same time, we have a Conservative government that is underfunding our provincial system by about 10% per capita on average compared to the other provinces, and has Bill 124 freezing the wages of our workers to 1% inflation. And we know that inflation is now at 6.8%. So we've essentially made this perfect storm of de-incentivizing folks from being in that system, right? As people are tapping out, burnt out from the whole COVID experience. So NDP, we would reverse those cuts. We want to see our funding match what's going on with the other provinces as a bare minimum. We would remove Bill 124, which would allow workers' wages to be pegged to inflation. We would give an immediate raise to personal support workers, so $5 above pre-pandemic levels. This is really, really important because we have so many seniors retiring in our riding. And without the personal support workers, we simply cannot accommodate them. That service, home care, allows people to stay in their homes longer. It keeps people happily aging in place rather than filling up hospitals or long-term care homes, right? So it's an important part of it. We need to start to recruit doctors to our areas. But where are we going to get those doctors, right? Because we're under-resourced. So there's about 15,000 nurses that are foreign trained, but haven't got their credentialing moved through the system. We would speed that up. So that gives us some nurses. And then in terms of doctors, a pairing system so that folks that are trained internationally can begin to get the local experience they need so that they can begin to practice here in our fine province. I've been told that lab technicians and folks in that area, there's hardly enough being produced. So we need to up that education system so that we are producing enough to meet the demands that we have. The other area that's really important is providing funding so that we're not relying solely on the hospitals. So here's a few examples. Nurse practitioner-led clinics, hospice, midwives, all of these things, when we invest in them, they help to provide wraparound care. So these are things the NDP would be supporting. Other early interventions would be, like I said, home care, dental care, pharmacare, mental health. All of these things, when we invest early, we actually prevent larger expenditures later on. So something simple like dental care, when somebody, actually 5 days ago, was chatting to a doctor who said that they are forever prescribing antibiotics and pain medications for folks who do not have dental care and end up at the emerge. So again, most costly option is to be an emerge. Less costly is to provide regular dental cleaning for folks that make less than $90,000 a year, and a sliding scale for the rest of us. This kind of investment, as opposed to spending, saves us money. Mental health, if for every dollar we put in, it saves us $2 later, because all of these other interventions are not required. Perhaps then the last and most important thing is that the NDP is strictly against any privatization of our hospital system, any of it. So this is what's exactly happening right now. So it's not a hypothetical might be happening with the Conservative government. It is happening with our labs, with our long-term care homes, with some outpatient surgery type things. So we need to keep that public. When we do that, we keep our costs down and we don't create a two-tier system. So lots to say there. I could say more, Pamela, but that's a good start.
Thank you, Erin. So how would you grade the province's COVID-19 response and why?
Okay, well, at the beginning, we didn't know what we were dealing with, right? So my hat's off to everyone in leadership, because that is an unpredictable, scary, unsure time. As we moved along, though, we did know what we were dealing with. And we knew that we needed capacity in our hospitals. I just told you how we purposefully have not been investing to get our healthcare system up to the standards of other provinces. Yet we are using that as a measure of deciding when we would shut down our entire school and economy, right? So here's where I have objections. I would rather have seen us investing in boosting that healthcare system up and kept our schools and our economy open in a safe way. I would rather see us investing in reducing classroom sizes, getting HEPA filters in there, working to create an environment that is safe rather than shutting everything down. And I would most certainly rather see our small businesses kept open rather than us getting shut down and the large box stores, multinational corporations being able to be kept open. So you can see that there's some imbalances there. Going forward, I would be advocating for regional decision making. There's no need for us to be shutting down everything here when there's the case count is low, just because they're dealing with it in the GTA area. And just to give an example of why this matters, I have some friends in Northwestern Ontario who would have been seeing no case counts whatsoever, yet being shut down month and month and month. So that's even more extreme than what we had. So we need to keep our economy open moving forward. And I would be advocating for every effort that does that safely.
Thank you, Erin. So what we're hearing from voters is that they care very deeply right now about what the cost of living is doing to their bottom line in their households. So what will your party do to manage these cost of living increases in Parry Sound-Muskoka and Almaguin?
Yes, and these are huge. Okay, where to start? So some of our costs of living, right? So we're looking at transportation, we're looking at housing, childcare, basic medical necessities, right? So let's start with one that I keep hearing at the door, which is gas, right? Our transportation costs are going up. If we have our own vehicle, we're looking at some of the highest insurance rates in Canada, and we're looking at high gas rates. If we don't have that, we're looking at municipal transit, which is inadequate. So we have a challenge here. So what would the NDP do about gas? We would be looking to equalize, so have a regulation strategy like they have in 5 other provinces. We just don't have one here. We should. Another thing that we would do, this Conservative government canceled cap and trade. In some ways that was good in that it was a weird system and you could, trade with California, say you're going to plant a tree in Bolivia, and there was no accountability there. But on the positive side is we had a pot of money, and that money we could use strategically. So this is what the NDP would do. We would bring back cap and trade, but for Ontario only. So that allows us to monitor emissions and offsets. And then it gives us a pot of money, which we can use at least 25% of to offset the increased costs for rural and northern Ontarians. And then use the remainder for investing in diversifying our energy sector.
Good afternoon, Parry
So that gives us
Chamber of Commerce.
something much different
Yes,
to
it is.
work in terms of handling.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm sorry, Erin. Catherine, can you please mute yourself? I'm afraid you're coming through over top of
yes.
Erin. If everybody could please mute themselves other than Erin, that would be lovely. Sorry, Erin.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. So that would be a strategy to begin to immediately deal with the gas prices. When it comes to our housing, we are looking at, we need to cool our housing market down. So there's a really, really great analysis of this, which basically said that some of what's going on is due to wealthy, greedy, however you want to call them, investors scooping up large amounts of real estate, holding on to it, driving up prices. So a non-resident speculation tax of 20% over the entire province would be meant to cool that down, as well as a very minor tax for people who own more than one home. So that would be like a 1% tax, right? So that would start to cool things down a little bit more. For affordability further, when it comes to home ownership, we would be offering a 10% down payment for new home buyers. So that gives them an opportunity. But then the second bit of it that's really important when it comes to the affordability of housing is our inclusionary zoning. So right now we have exclusionary zoning, which means we can only buy or build certain types of homes. And sometimes those are not the ones that we can also afford. So at a range of sizes, triplexes, duplexes, granny suites, laneway houses, different things that we can then create within our own properties or new builds that would create more affordability for our housing. We have childcare to look at. This is a really big one because what's actually happening in our riding is that we have become such an unaffordable place to live with such few housing and childcare options that people have actually left our riding. And we don't have the workers we need to fill our businesses. So this is a really big part of it. So folks that have remained in our riding, which believe me, I've talked to many, there's quite an out-migration that's happened. But those that are here, many are saying, I would like to work, and I'm waiting at least a year long or more for a childcare space. So we need to be looking at how do we get that $10 a day federal childcare happening quickly. The Conservative government has been dragging their feet on this. We need to move that quicker. And we need to invest in the early childhood educators, get their wages up to $25 an hour and other staff up to $20 so that we can have the staffing. We need to attract people to that sector. So that's another piece of that equation. For folks that are renting, rent prices have gone like astronomically through the roof, right? Part of that is because there's a lack of supply. So the NDP would strategically build 250,000 affordable housing units geared to income or below market rent to start to add that supply, which has been neglected by both Conservative and Liberal governments. So we need to work on that. And then we also need to make sure that we have rent control. So rent control right now, anything built after 2018 doesn't have that rent control built in, which means landlords can hike up the prices if they so desire. So we need to be working on keeping that affordable. And then the other side of it, I mentioned that I work with small businesses. Our costs of insurance have gone through the roof. So mine personally has gone 30% increase in the last 2 years, 50% in the last 4 years. So we need to regulate that. And we need to do that on the residential side as well, auto, residential, and commercial. And then we also need to protect our small businesses from their rent increases when their lease comes due. So these are some of the things that we can be doing just to immediately begin to deal with the affordability. The other great bit, which I mentioned when I said about healthcare, was the dental care plan and pharmacare and mental health, right? These are all things that people are really struggling with right now. So having that help from the province would make life that bit more affordable.
Thank you, Erin. And I apologize to everyone for the background noise that is suddenly going on. We have two questions here, Erin, from Climate Action Muskoka. One, the highest contributor by far to greenhouse gas emissions in Parry Sound-Muskoka is the transportation sector. How will you ensure that these emissions drop dramatically as demanded by the urgency of the climate crisis?
Okay, so this is a kind of an interesting one because we're looking at it across the province, but then also looking at it locally here, right? And our public transit is a challenge. So the one thing we need to do is get our public transit up to par so that people can use it in a regular sort of way. The Liberal and Conservative governments cut the funding that we would have normally gotten for public transit. NDP would bring it back. That would give us 50% of operating costs back to have a robust or more robust public transit and electrify all public transit by 2040. So that is a really big piece of it. The Northlander train, we would be definitely supporting that as an alternative to the trip to the city and back, and then as well as north, right? And all the stops and a schedule that would make it make sense to actually use it, which is key for public transit. An Ontario electric vehicle emissions strategy, and to have all of our vehicles 100% electric vehicles by 2035. And then promoting that infrastructure. So right now, we do not have the electrical infrastructure to just allow all of us to have electric cars. So there has to be an investment in that, and the NDP would be doing that. So our grid needs to be upgraded there. For those who can afford it, a $600 credit towards the charging stations that would go into our homes. Now, I just want to say an important caveat here, and this is where I'm bringing some of my environmental planning background in. When we talk about, we all want to have an electric vehicle, we need to understand that the minerals to make those batteries come from mining. That is one of the least environmentally friendly activities, period. So we need to actually be thinking about how are we going to recycle these batteries? What are we going to do to keep that from being a destructive endeavor? And case in point, the Ring of Fire, which is in northwestern Ontario. Doug Ford has taken target on that, previous Liberals as well. But we have a complicated situation there where some First Nations want the initiatives to happen in their area. Some do not. All First Nations are being kept very in poverty. So it's almost like a manipulative thing to be able to say to them, well, do you want in on this or not? So one of the key things for the NDP in looking at how to do environmentalism and this move to a carbon-free economy fairly is that we have to be addressing these power differences. And we cannot be leaving anybody behind, meaning, just not addressing gas prices and saying, oh, well, we'll just let it go because we're going to all get electric vehicles one day. We can't just do that. And we can't just do it on the backs of Indigenous peoples. And I can tell you right now that this is one of the weak links when you listen to people talk about environmental policy. So you'll hear them say things like get cheaper electricity from Quebec or from Manitoba, or we'll just get all electric vehicles. But what we're talking about here is Indigenous lands. So that cheaper hydro comes because Indigenous lands were flooded. So they're dealing with methylmercury in the water. They're dealing with astronomically high hydro bills. They're not getting compensated as nations. And then if you're in Quebec, you have First Nations banding together saying you cannot just market everything as cheap and free and greener while you're still continuing to act in such an unethical way. So you can see this is one of the areas that, as an environmentalist who educates environmentalists, that's what I do as part of my work as at charity, is that when we have this simplified notion that we're all just going to become more green because we get an electric vehicle, that is a sorely simplified understanding of what we need to be doing here.
So this leads into the second part of climate Action Muskoka's question, which is, how do you see the solutions required by the climate crisis also meeting the needs of the people of Parry Sound-Muskoka?
Yes, so let's frame this with understanding that Parry Sound-Muskoka has some of the hardest working people here. Like I introduced myself at the beginning, many of us have more than one job that we do, and we still have on average about 20% less income per household than the rest of the province. You will see somebody like, say, the Green Party saying, well, we are not going to regulate gas prices. We are going to invest all of that into renewables. Well, what do you do in the meantime for the construction workers? I've been talking to them at the door. They're saying, I don't even know how to get to the site that I'm building on. You know, it's an hour away there and back every day. So we have to look at the affordability factor. And this is part of why the NDP stance is so important when it comes to change. So I told you about the cap and trade, using 25% of that income to offset the cost. That's why it matters so much. This is why we need to regulate the gas prices. These are just examples. So yes, we need to move in that direction. All the new bills that NDP would propose would be carbon neutral by 2035. So we're moving in that direction, but we have to be doing it in a way that looks after all people. Just as a side and an interesting note, so Dr. Gordon Laxer, who's one of the our nation's climate experts, has endorsed myself as the strongest candidate, partly because of my planning background, but then the other bit is because of the focus the NDP has of moving the climate initiative forward, but not leaving people behind and not doing it on the backs of Indigenous peoples. So it just happens that Gordon lives in Gravenhurst. So thankful for that endorsement.
Okay, so 15 minutes left to our discussion today. So I'm going to open this up to questions from the folks who are participating. Does anyone have a question? If so, please raise your hand. You see the hand raising. Looking for questions from participants. Okay, Margaret has raised her hand. So I'm unmuting you, Margaret. I'm attempting to unmute you, Margaret. Okay, looks like you're live. Margaret, what's your question?
I have concerns with affordable housing as well in the Parry Sound area. We have so many people since this pandemic searching for affordable housing, but on the same token, we have an opioid crisis going on. We've lost so many young people to this, and I'm not hearing anybody address this from any of the parties. And it's frustrating to watch our young people struggle to afford to live here. As you said, they can't afford the cost of living, and they fall into this, I don't know, sewer. It's I don't know what else to say. And then we have this opioid crisis on top of it that is just dragging our youth down. I mean, we've grown as a community. We've watched more and more people buy around us and buy our properties, and we are expanding, but we're losing our youth. And nobody is addressing this opioid crisis and the crime that comes with it in this province. I'm wondering where you stand on this. What is your solution?
Thank you, Margaret. Oh, okay. This one is very personal for me. I have a family member right now who's living with an opioid addiction, and there's no treatment. And I'm personally trying to help get him treatment, and it's very frustrating and upsetting. I've also, I mentioned in my introduction, I've worked in communities. One of the things I did was work in a community that had 80% of their adults using opioids. I'm very familiar with what's going on in our riding. And I agree with you that we need to be addressing it. It's strangely absent from our media. It's like a travesty that is not mentioned. So what is the NDP about? So declaring an opioid crisis, making it clear, helping people understand that that's the level that we're at, investing in addiction and rehabilitation, detox centers, harm reduction strategies, all the things that the Ford government has canceled, those supervised injection sites. These are things that I believe if people understood more clearly how harm reduction works, they would see that it's not about saying to somebody that, this is the only option. It's about steps towards recovery, and you need to meet people where they're at. So the NDP also has built in, 60,000 supportive housing units that would include wraparound supports for people living with addictions. Because one of the challenges that we have is that they tend to be put in places then where there isn't that supportive housing component, which then starts the cycle again, right? Which criminalization of activities, and then in order to use and onward we go. So in our riding, so yes, we need to we have to have the support to deal with the treatment. Bringing OHIP under mental health will help. One of my former partners was a child and youth mental health psychotherapist. And so often the wait lists were so long to get youth help that they ended up turning to addictions to cope. So we need to get that wait list down. That's at least a piece of that puzzle. And then we need to be very, very serious about creating a riding that is livable for folks. I don't know how I can tell you clearly enough. I'm talking to people every day at the door. People are leaving our riding. This is the exact opposite that we need to bring people in to create that robust, alive place where folks can stay here and feel like they have a hope for building a future here, for building families, right? We're missing that. So in this whole movement of, whether we become green or not, or all this stuff, we need to always be looking at that livability of our communities. And on a personal note, right, is that we need to listen closely to the stories of people who are suffering from addictions. In my experience, almost always there's a connection to trauma. Almost always.
Thank you for that response. Do any of our other guests have a question for Erin today? I will pick a question from our list, but if you do think of something, please do put your hand up and we'll come back to you. So, Erin, we have a question from David Tom of Torrance. He says, I am a property owner in the township of Muskoka Lakes. Summer weekend traffic on overburdened Highway 11 and 400 is as predictable as a lovely Muskoka sunset. If elected, would you work to have the provincial transit agency, Metrolinx, study a seasonal weekend extension of GO Transit up the Richmond Hill line to Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, and Huntsville? The tracks are there, the stations are there, the equipment is there. All that is needed is a push from the government for GO and CN to try out such an excursion service as an experiment. What?
So, in short, yes, but it's part of a bigger picture, right? Which is the NDP is about keeping things like transit public. And how that helps us as a riding is that when we don't keep privatizing things, we create a fluid system where then we can have systems connecting. So when we privatize, we kind of get left out of things because we are considered not as high of a traffic. So we're not a moneymaker area, except for those times of the year, right? So bringing things back into public hands helps us, as well as strategically saying, okay, so we want to be a connected province, not just, parts of us connected. So bringing back in that bigger picture means that we will have the opportunity to start to connect the dots between some of the pre-existing private companies, as well as, adding some of our own public routes in. So yes, I would absolutely support that. And I would also support the return of the train, so that we have other ways, because you're right, it's horrendous to try to get anywhere on a Friday evening, as we're all aware, right?
Thank you, Erin.
Mhm.
Heidi from Parry Sound asks, my mother recently applied and received her dental card for seniors. This is great for those in the low income category. Problem is she can't use it. We tried registering her dental card with the Parry Sound Health Unit and have been told that there are no dentists that can accept this card. She would have to drive 2 hours north to North Bay and does not have a car, nor can she drive at 84 years old. I don't know why a benefit like this exists if it can't be used. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the practical things, right, that we need to be figuring out how to make dental care something that is universal, right? That it's not just the people who can pay or people can't pay and then kind of haggling in between. It's the same thing actually for eye care. Kind of same sort of dynamic is at play. So the NDP would be implementing the dental care as a public program. I mentioned earlier on that when we do that, we save the system money. So how it would look is that folks who make households make $90,000 or less, it would be free. And then from 90,000 to 250,000, we'd have a sliding scale. So when we start to see things like that happen on a universal scale, then hopefully your mom's care isn't just like tokenized as like, well, we don't offer these things, right? It should be something that then all dentists will offer locally, so she doesn't have to travel to get specialized care.
Thank you, Erin. And our next question for Dale is, would the candidates like to comment on OHIP-sponsored eye care for seniors? And you kind of just did. Did you have anything to add to that?
Well, just that I think that it's crucial. Eye care in general, as well as hearing aids. So I have a hearing aid here. I just got one. And I had no idea that these things were so costly. And so when people don't have the means to pay for them, it's an example of an early barrier to inclusion in society. So yes, for seniors, absolutely, they need to have the support to have the eye care that they need, the hearing care as well, but all of us do. We need to be working in that direction of figuring out how to do that in an affordable way, especially for those who are low income and don't have that option.
We have another question. This one's from Jill. I would like to hear what the rest of the candidates would offer. I'm not sure anyway, would offer as far as a rebate for people to buy electric bicycles, new or used. I know they are pricey, but a rebate may encourage people to buy and offset vehicle use.
I'm not sure if the NDP has chimed in on this one. But what I do know, generally speaking, is that we're about trying to incentivize things that would create like affordability and incentivize the things that would be climate friendly. So I think it would be an interesting thing to explore and see, well, what could be done and how could that be done. Broadly speaking, kind of when we talk about early interventions, things that get people out and active, we know that is a benefit to our society, right? That the decreases in costs on the mental health front, the physical front are significant. Well, in this case, there's also an environmental side. The parts that need to be figured out and why I hum and haw is I was just talking with someone at a bicycle shop the other day, and they told me that for every bicycle, electric or otherwise, it costs you have to use it 2,400 times at 5 kilometers each time just to make up for the carbon emissions that it creates in being made. So this is why I say I'm really intrigued by your question. I would want to figure out, well, could we do that? How would it benefit? And then how does it fit into this larger scale of understanding how carbon emissions work and whether it benefits us or not?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, not a very clear answer, but no, you caught my curiosity and I would be exploring it for sure.
Okay, thank you. Our last reader question. Except let's go to Don's question first, since he is here. Don, I am unmuting Don, attempting to unmute Don. He may have already done that. Okay, Don, which question?
Yeah, hello. I've heard some discussion about the property tax deferral idea for seniors. but I haven't heard much detail about that. And I'm just wondering, how would that work?
And I'm not sure that I can offer tons more details about that either. I just know that there's been talk about it. So I don't know the intricate details of how it would work, but I know that the idea is to try to create that greater affordability. So that's what I can say. Dawn, if you want to email me, I can look up the details, but I don't want to sit here and pretend and make something up and then not be accurate. But you can, if you'd like to email me, my email is erin.horvath@OntarioNDP.ca. And I promise if you send me a quick message, I will look into that and get back to you with the actual facts about it.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, Erin. So, final question then on our list, and this from Dale McQuillan. Do you agree that unvaccinated citizens of this province should not be allowed to volunteer at election polling stations? And I don't get the last half of that, so let's leave it with that. Are you aware that people need to be vaccinated to volunteer at polling stations? Seems reasonable in the time of COVID.
Yeah, I haven't had anybody specifically tell me about that. So I can't confirm nor deny that that's true. It kind of leads to that bigger question about vaccinations in general, which I can kind of comment on that.
Sure.
So a little bit of background. So yes, I believe that vaccines are a good public health tool for most folks. And I have a child who was harmed by a vaccine when he was 6. And so I kind of exist in both worlds in that we've been navigating this whole COVID time, trying to figure out what to do with him now because he's 17 and he's had now 2 vaccines at different points in his life and has had complications with both, and they were very serious complications. So when it comes to this whole vaccine business, the one thing I want to say is that it matters a great deal to me that when we communicate things that we're being very clear about what it is we're talking about. So there's a couple different levels. One is, between a person and their own kind of gut feeling about how something is. We have between a doctor and the patient. We have the public health, which job is to look after the good of all of us, right? And especially the most vulnerable. We have science, who's supposed to keep track of like what's happening in real time as we know those things, right? And then we have politicians whose job it is to look after the system. And one of the challenges that I have and what I would be wanting to see is that we're very clear about who's communicating and over what area do they have that authority. And one of the challenging things is when we have people overreaching and speaking to levels that are not their area of expertise, it becomes an area of confusion. So if that kind of makes sense, that I kind of sit with my feet in both camps, because I do have to look after a child who has, a very like part of that little percentage, right? That tiny little percentage of our population that has a real difficult time for some reason with vaccinations. That's my child. And I can see, I am vaccinated. I work in vulnerable populations. I have a son who's vulnerable. So I can see both of these things. So when it comes to making decisions, I want to see us continue as we move forward, and especially under the NDP, is to figure out what is our risks, how do we manage those, and how do we speak and communicate to the public in a way that shows that we're managing the system and what's best for the overall system, not trying to communicate in one of those other areas, which is out of our purview as political leaders to do so.
Okay, Erin, we've come to the end of our time. Would you like to close up with a conclusion?
I would love to. So I hope in speaking to you today that I've demonstrated that there's some complex issues at hand, right? These are not just simple, like just snap your finger and everything will become better if we just do this one thing or two things, right? My life sits at the cross section of business, social justice, environmental justice, First Nations issues. I'm a landlord. I'm also, care very much about the rights of tenants. So I exist in this complexity space, right? I want to see us move forward when it comes to environmental change. And I want to see us do that in a way that doesn't create life in such a way that it's so unaffordable that we then alienate the young people and families, as we were talking about earlier, right? We need to be figuring out together, how do we make this system work? I want to see our small businesses grow. I know that we need workers to do that. I know that the NDP offers us a platform that helps us to grow that base, right? That quality of life, to help bring us to a point where we're not just doing seasonal employment, but year-round employment, right? We need to be growing strategically. Green manufacturing. We need to be looking at how do we have housing for all types of people in our riding. These are things that the NDP could help us with. And in doing so, we would be filling up our small businesses. We'd be creating opportunities for our young people. And then we'd be able to, serve the many folks that want to retire and live in our beautiful riding. So I hope that you would consider, when you speak to me, consider voting on June 2nd or in the Vance polls for somebody who understands complex change. I've dedicated my life to this. This is what my skill set is about. And I would be honored to be able to offer this to our riding. And thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you for being with us today and speaking to the voters. Thanks to everyone for attending this special live election event. And remember, your vote counts.
Mm-hmm.
Goodbye.